Hello and welcome to In a Spiritual Sense, where we discuss all things spiritual, from growing your intuition, speaking with spirit guides, diving into past lives, the paranormal, and more. Join me, Stacey Piagno, where we work to bridge the gap between science and spirit. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of In a Spiritual Sense. I'm your host, Stacey Piagno, and today is going to be a fun episode because we get to talk about those who are here to protect and guide us. Talking about spirit guides. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, I bet most of us have at least entertained the idea that we have some sort of help and support with us. And maybe if you're going through a tough time, you might be questioning this whole topic altogether. It is, however, my understanding that we are all given some sort of protective energy as we are born. And I think it's important for us to connect with whatever this energy is and what it means to us. Now, what you call it is up to you. Some people might think of spirit guides. Some people might think of angels. Some people might think animal totems, past relatives, Jesus, or maybe a little bit of everything. I think it's important, however, that we allow each other space to have our own perspectives and our own subjective opinions of this energy. And what I can offer you is the perspective of what I have personally connected with. And I am excited for this one because, as usual, I've got some stories to share. But quickly before we get into it, I do want to talk about the word guide because I feel like this term can mean different things to different people. And when defined, it really just means someone who shows you the way, or anything or anyone that can help with advice. So when I think of this, I try to stay open to the energy of my helpers because, for example, yes, I do believe that my grandmother who passed helps me and is at times a guide. But for today's case, there is a separate layer of energy that I believe is connected to solely me in this life. And it stays with me at all times. And it's dedicated to watching over me. And we all have this. And whether it's one guide or multiple guides or different per person is for the logical mind to wrestle with. Because when working with spirit, it's important that we place our logic to the side. It's all about feeling. And what I feel is a connection to three guides. And sometimes they're more prevalent in my life, depending on what I'm going through, but they're always there. And even thinking back to when I was a child, I can find memories of their presence. So what I want to share with you today is the story of when I realized their existence and the story of some of those coincidences, which we now know are messages, of when they have spoken to me and helped me. I also have some beautiful messages that they have shared with me that I would like to pass on to you today. So, to jump right in, the way it all began was around the time when I first started learning how to meditate and really spend time with myself. And it was during that time that I began to notice how often I see images in my mind. And it's hard to explain, but it's similar to the sense of thought we've previously talked about, but more so in a visual sense. And the best way to describe it is I will close my eyes and I will either see a quick silhouette of something or I'll see this very colorful fluid energy, kind of like a lava lamp. And eventually that energy will turn into a more fluid-like silhouette of something. And in the beginning, I didn't put any intention or acknowledgement on the fact that I was even seeing images until I started hearing about other people who had the same experience and how it was a form of communicating. So eventually it started to resonate with me and it clicked and I really took it and ran with it. And the more I trusted that no, I was not making this up, the more things started to fall into place. And even if you do make something up, I think it's important to pay attention to what are you making up, because there might be a reason why your brain is thinking that. But the first guide that I met was Maria, and she came through very quick, very headstrong, just like her personality, and a bit like mine. But this particular day, I had made an intention during a meditation to meet my spirit guide. And as I sat, I closed my eyes and I immediately saw her face very vividly. And I didn't believe it for the longest time, but it got to a point where every time I closed my eyes, I would see her. And every time I looked up, there would be a sign that matched my vision. So, as I've spoken on Symbols and Messages, thanks to the help of Spirit's timing and repetition, I was able to surrender to the idea of, okay, this is her. And I do want to take a quick time out and say, again, it's my perspective that as our souls come and go, we often change forms and lives, but the personalities and gifts we have remain with us. And when speaking of a guide in this way, what I've found is they all have personalities, but their appearance might not be as important as we would like it to be. Now, with that said, I do believe that they can choose to present themselves with what they best connect with, or with what they think best resonates with us, or they can show up as we intend for them to. Because remember, we can set intentions for spirit. And I think being open to the energy you are connecting with versus trying to over personify who you're connecting with is important for us to understand. One of my guides once told me very directly, we are all the same energy. You must understand this. And I think I'm finally starting to. That's why I always give the disclaimer, it doesn't matter what you call the energy that you pray to, because on some level, it's really all the same. But it took me a while to figure that out because I was always stuck on the narrative of who is or who are my guides? What do they look like? What are their names? But I was thinking too much on a grounded level. And whether Maria chose to show me her favorite form or whether I created her was irrelevant because her personality follows me and teaches me and supports me. And when I say her energy weighs more on the feminine side because there's no such thing as man or woman in spirit form. It's all about the energy that you carry and the way you think and act. And personifying energy into a man or woman is just something that our brains do to help us make sense. And I think we're definitely going to have an episode on masculinity and femininity because I feel there is a huge misunderstanding with those terms. But getting back into it, when I first saw Maria's image, she appeared to me as a woman wearing a head wrap with large earrings, and she would always show me her lips. And this could have been her literal lips or just a feminine symbol, which is very representative of her personality. But to me, she represents my feminine power and strength. And if I had to describe her as a character, I would relate her to a female superhero. She's a bit sassy, and she helps me stand for what I believe in. And she helps me conquer challenges I may have around the suppressed feminine within our society. And so if I had to put words on it, this is kind of how I would describe her. And my favorite story with Maria was when I was trying to find her a name. And early on, I would always sit and try to let something come through, and I always got the letter M. And I was trying so hard because I really wanted to call her what she wanted me to call her. And so I had names come and go, one of which was Maria. And there was one day when I was driving home from work, and I had asked for a very blatant sign. And I said, okay, as soon as I get home, I'm going to go meditate on this, and I'm going to find this name for her. And I kid you not, I was sitting at a stoplight, and my Spotify was on shuffle, and the very next song that came on was an African song called Maria Rosa. And the album cover was a woman in a head wrap with large earrings. And I freaked out. And then once the song started, the guy singing says, Maria, 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 like 50 times. And so I was screaming inside, and I was like, all right, got it. Thank you. So that's how her name came about. And now that I have solidified it with an intention, we use that to communicate. Now, for a while, I was only aware of Maria. And maybe it was because she was who I needed most at that time. But what started to happen is as I continued to work with my sense of thought and my visual meditations, I would very often see 3 circles. And I had no idea what this meant. Didn't matter to me at the time. I just kind of kept the idea tucked away in my back pocket, and I knew one day I would either figure it out or not. And during that time, I was visiting a friend of mine who is clairvoyant, which, if you looked up the definition, would tell you is someone who has the ability to know things or who can go beyond those 5 survival senses. And from what I've witnessed, he can basically speak to spirits. When I went to see him, I was telling him about Maria, and he was like, "Oh, your guides. You have 3 of them." And I was immediately filled with this knowing of, oh my gosh, the 3 circles. I knew it without a doubt. It all makes sense. And anyways, that ended up being the confirmation I needed moving forward. So of course I go home and I really start spending some time meditating on these 3 guides and trying to understand more about them. And at this point, I was still really stuck on personifying them and visually understanding how they looked, basically fulfilling my rational side. But over the next couple of weeks was actually when I stumbled upon what I now know to be channeling in the form of automatic writing. And I think I mentioned this on a past episode, but basically I just start writing and information comes out without me consciously being aware of what I'm writing. And so in addition, I do this with my drawings because I've always been an artist and I've always enjoyed drawing, and usually I have my sketch pad out. So what I began to realize is over, I don't know, that past month, I had started to draw these scribbly characters over and over. And the more I drew them, the more I realized I had drawn characters with repeated features. Like one little thing I picked up on, which blew my mind, was this one character who always had a heart over her head. And I know that's not her facial features, but this is a good story. So I remember one of the nights when I was doing a sketch, right before I put my notepad away, I had this very strong feeling to add a little heart at the top of the page, which just so happened to be over top of one of the characters' heads. And this meant absolutely nothing to me. I didn't even associate the heart with that character. But I think over a month later, maybe even 2, when I had a better idea of what my guides were starting to look like, that I did another drawing of them. And as I finished, I remember drawing a heart over the forehead of who I now call Willow. And I will introduce her next, but it wasn't even until several months after that when I was looking back at my drawings and I saw this heart on her head in multiple pictures. And you can believe me or not, but when I held up the pictures of all my drawings and realized not only the hearts on her head, but also how I had been drawing the same characters over and over, I freaked out again. And so, all that to say, that is how the seeds became planted. And looking back at everything I've now learned, it's funny how in tune I really was, even though my mind would not always allow me to accept it. And that's what I really want everyone to take away, is I bet so many of you are really connected with your spirit or your guides or your messages, but you're stopping yourself from receiving this guidance in some way. Or maybe you're already aware of your connection, but you still doubt the things you encounter. So I challenge you to trust it. Just take a period of time, whatever you're doubting, and just go with it and see what happens. Because once I started to do this, that's when things really started to change for me. So moving on, I mentioned meeting my second guide, who I call Willow, and it's just so funny because she truly is my heart. And the first time I met her was in a dream, and she's very much so become my dream guide, among other things. And the night I had this dream was many years ago, but it's still very vivid to me. And she appeared right in front of me as this older Native American grandmother woman. And she had this soft smile, and she was just staring at me. And I can remember feeling such a love between her and I. And then shortly after, an angel appeared in my dream, and she was glowing, and she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And I don't know if she was connected to Willow, or if she was separate, or if it was just maybe to show me that Willow is like an angel to me. And honestly, the specifics don't matter. But ever since I had that dream, I've always thought about this grandmother character. And Perhaps it was my intention that her character became one of my guides, but she's always around and she's always in my dreams, and she always has that same soft smile and squinted eyes. And from what I gather, she works a lot with herbs, and she's very natural and prevalent in nature. And in the next story I'm about to tell you, I don't believe I had already named her Willow yet. But there was one night around the same time frame I had been doing these sketches, and I had sat down for a meditation with the intention to meet my guides. And I began to feel my body bounce from front to back, almost like a dance led from my heart. And in this moment, I consciously heard drums. And I felt so connected with my ancestors. And then all of a sudden, I felt a very heavy presence over my right shoulder. And ironically, that is where my Dreamcatcher tattoo is. And I immediately knew it was her, without a doubt. And now at this time, I was a little hesitant because I'm like, okay, there is a presence of something right here. But I know it's all love, so it's okay. And I am very intentional with my space and my prayer and my cleansing. And I am still learning, but what I do know is I am very protected, and I can feel that. So it was in this moment when Willow's presence was confirmed in my mind. And that same night, I actually put on the movie Pocahontas after, which I've absolutely loved ever since I was a kid. Even though the story is not accurate. Yes, I know this, but it fills a hole I have, and it's one of my guilty pleasure movies. But my intention in putting this on was one, because after having felt a spirit standing right next to you, putting on a Disney movie is not a bad idea. And two, I was really feeling my roots after that session. And now this is kind of a tricky topic, but when I say roots, we have to understand that we are so much more than just this life. We are multidimensional beings, and we have roots of all different cultures buried within us. And in this moment, and very much so in this life, I feel extremely connected to many of my indigenous lives, the strongest connection coming from that of the Americas. And I know saying that right now is kind of getting into another lane, so we'll save that for later. But basically, I just really wanted to watch this movie. And actually, now that I think about it, this was the night when I gave Willow her name, because if it hasn't already crossed your mind, she kind of really reminds me of Grandmother Willow from Pocahontas. And since I've always been drawn to that movie, you can, of course, debate, well, did I subconsciously create Willow because of that movie? Or did I see Willow's presence and then link it to that movie? But you have to understand, it does not matter. It doesn't matter if the chicken or the egg came first, because it's the outcome of what we've gained that's important. And the guidance I receive from her is just as useful no matter how she was created. It's her energy that I'm able to tap into, and that's a part of me. And so, as I put the movie on, I start writing in my journal about the experience I just had. And when I began to write, I got to the part where she was standing right next to me. And of course, I hear the song Listen to Your Heart come on the movie. And I have an instant reminder of all those hearts I drew over her head. And let me remind you, I had done this with no real intention of anything. And it was long before I had watched the movie or before Willow was even established in my mind. So as that song came on, thanks to timing and repetition, I accepted the message and connected the heart with her presence. And I really do feel that watching that movie and hearing that song at that particular moment was the confirmation I needed and just the cherry on top. And so after this night, I named her Willow. And now that I am more familiar with her presence, whenever I connect with her energy, she very often speaks to me with analogies found in nature. And she has a very poetic Mother Earth style of communication. And she also speaks a lot on innocence. And so I have two pieces here that I want to share on behalf of Willow and myself. The first one I have titled Earth Child, which makes me laugh because it's such a hippie name. But it reads as follows. All around you are spirits. They watch you play, they watch you learn, they watch you grow. You will always be safe and protected. This earth is a spirit. It is a living, breathing body. We are here to take care of her, and in return, she will take care of us. Feel her heartbeat. Listen to her wind. As you breathe in, she breathes out. You are one. And in this oneness, you are truly unstoppable. Your life is anything you want it to be. You just have to create it. And it is quite simple, really. And in this simplicity, your creations will be made. So, that's Willow. And in addition to that, I have one more piece that I want to share titled The Wisdom of Innocence. And I think it's a good reminder for all of us. And it actually reminds me about that dream I just talked about last week in regards to taking the perspective of allowing your innocence to be your protection. And that's not to be confused with being unaware of your surroundings. Because in reality, with the way society is, in my opinion, being close to your inner child is actually to be more aware of your connection with spirit. So, here is the wisdom of innocence. And at some points you will hear me say her, but that's just because this was originally written for me. So if you don't resonate with her, just go with it for the message. You are a free-willed child here on this earth to learn and explore. Not a worry in the world, for you are close with spirit, and there is no better place to be. The child within us all is where we will thrive. No matter how big or how small, it is always there. When you meet her, hold her near. Feel the love and wisdom of innocence she carries. Because the wisdom of innocence is a hidden treasure, which many have not found. It is, however, buried within us all, and it is up to you to decide when to pull it out. So, a little bit of love and advice from my Willow energy. Now, moving on to my third guide. I'm pretty sure I used to see him as a child, and I think I've somehow repressed it, but it is more of a masculine energy, and he comes across more stern and father-like, but still very loving. And he was a little challenging to connect with in the beginning, probably because I was trying too hard and I wanted all of my answers all at once. But I would very often draw these masculine faces, and a lot of times I would put some kind of paint or black lines across the eyes, very indigenous-like. And I think what happened was I was searching so hard for the physical specifics. And okay, so this is a crazy story because the way that he initially showed himself to me was without a doubt the most transparent of the three. So quick background. One night I was visiting my mom's house and we were sitting out back by her fire pit and it was really late and it was just me and my partner and I started taking pictures of the fire. I don't know why, I just had an urge to do so. And there was this one picture that I thought was really pretty. So I ended up keeping it and I deleted all the rest. And the next morning while we're eating breakfast, I kept looking back at that picture. And honestly, it was just a picture of pretty flames. But something had me attached to it. And now I'm telling you 5 months later, it was around the time when I started getting into all of this. And I had made an intention to meet this masculine guide I have. So I sat down for a meditation, and a few minutes later, I realized I cannot focus, my mind is racing, and this just wasn't working. So I took a break, and as I started to get up, I had this very strong idea to go look back at that picture I took of the fire. And it was such a random thought. I mean, I honestly didn't even know if it was still on my camera roll. But I go back and I find the picture, and there, clear as day, is an apparition of this shaman medicine man standing amongst the flames. And I have never felt so much adrenaline shoot through my body as in that moment. I can't even explain it. He's right there, and he's wearing some kind of natural headpiece. He's got long black hair, and he's got what appears to be black paint across his eyes. And he's wearing this big cloak, and he's got his hands extended out, and the palm of one of his hands is up facing the sky, and there's this swirling smoke coming from it. And then the other palm is facing towards the ground, and there's this very strong line of energy connecting to it. And every time I show someone this picture, they see him immediately. With that said, however, I will also say a past job of mine consisted of working in the ghost tour industry for over like 10 years. And it started as a fun side job, and I got to get all dressed up and go out in town and tell people history and stories. And so, not to get in too deep to that, but I'll say I often see these situations where people take a picture of a tree branch, and because they're looking so hard for a ghost, they make themselves believe that there's a face in the tree branch. And I will say, as an artist, I've learned it's natural for our brains to see faces, and it's a quality that's built into us from birth, ever since we look up at our parents' faces. So when looking for a ghost in pictures, it is sometimes common that your brain will find a face somewhere. But when I describe this apparition to you, there is no, hey, look over here, do you see this face type of conversation. He is unmistakably visible, as if I took a photograph of you standing right in front of me. And again, let's just say that I was the only one to see him. It wouldn't matter, because this is a personal relationship between me and my guide, and this is how he appeared to me. And let me just say, if this picture itself was not already enough to make a statement, I look at the time that the photograph was taken, and it says 12:42. And I know I've previously discussed the number 12 is a number that represents me, and the number 42 is actually a number that represents my guides. And that time was not a coincidence. So, in addition to this personification of him, he also shows up to me as a bird of prey, which I have spoken about on the symbolism episode. And it's funny because before I saw him in the photo, when I would meditate, I would very often see big bird wings flapping in an orange or yellow color. And it got to the point where I would see this very vividly and very often. So that's when I attached that animal totem to his spirit. And it's neat because the color of the wings that I would always see is very representative of a fire. So that's just another connection I stumbled upon. But ever since I've taken that picture, whenever I sit by a fire or in the space of a fire pit, I always start thinking of him. And of course, when you start thinking of something, it begins to manifest. So usually as I think about him, he comes to me. And in my journal writings, he is probably one of the easiest to recognize because he's very straightforward, very wise, and he's very poetic with his advice, but in like a ancient dad type of way. That's how I think of him. This one time I was sitting out back at my house where we have a small fire pit, and it became a space I like to sit and sometimes write in the evenings. And this one night there was an empty chair off to my left, and I had this idea of him sitting there. So I'm like, well, if I'm thinking of him, he probably is sitting there. And a few minutes later, I hear this little noise come from the seat, like a little creak. And it kind of made me flinch for a second, but I carried on and again was thinking, well, he's probably sitting over there. Then as the sun began to set, and of course, as it started getting dark, out of nowhere, this bright orange light shoots from above the chair over to the garden. And I jumped out of my seat and freaked out. Because I don't care how many experiences I have, I still get very jumpy with this kind of stuff. And for the longest time, I kept trying to talk myself out of the fact that that had actually just happened. But after I settled back down, I was like, okay, well, that was him. So now when I use that space, I often think of it as one where we can connect and one where we can intentionally meet. So this is how it all started with me. These are the stories of how I initially became more aware of my spirit guides. And the more I work with them over the years, the stronger our connection becomes. And so I have a cute story real quick I want to share of a time when they came through and supported me at a very pivotal moment. there was this one evening when I went to grab some food, and I also had the idea that I really wanted to stop into a Goodwill. And so, of course, the sandwich shop that I go to just so happens to have a Goodwill next to it. So I go inside, I look around, and as I'm getting ready to leave, I back out of the parking lot, and something in my shifter broke. So basically, I am stuck in reverse in the middle of this parking lot with my foot on the brake. And there's cars trying to go around me, and I am definitely panicking inside. Um, and I've got my door open and I'm kind of hanging out the side. And this woman comes out and she's like, "Hey, can I help you with anything?" And I tell her, something broke. I don't really know what to do. I don't know if you can help. And so I kind of just told her not to worry about it. So she left. A few minutes later, a guy walks out and comes up to me and again is like, "Hey, do you need any help?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but I don't know what you can do." And he stops me and he's like, "I'm a mechanic." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, yes, please help me." And I explained to him what happened. And he's like, "Okay, I'm going to go under your car. Do not take your foot off the brake." I said, "Okay, I am not going to take my foot off the brake." So he goes under there and he does some things. And he says, "Okay, your car is now in drive." He said, "I want you to go through that street light, down two lefts, and then there's an auto parts store that I want you to meet me at." And I wasn't very familiar with this area of town, so I was terrified to drive, but I did what he said and made it to the store where I was now stuck in drive with my foot on the brake. And I waited for him to show up for what felt like an eternity. And he finally gets there and he goes back under the car and he puts it in park for me. And he's trying to teach me what's going on, and he goes inside the store with me and he helps me find this little $15 part, which he then replaces by crawling back under the car. And within 30 minutes, the car is done. He blesses it. I was no longer stuck in survival mode, needing a tow to the dealership, which would have probably cost $300. And so I thanked him profusely and I gave him all the cash I had, which was upsettingly not as much as he deserved. And I told him how much this meant to me and how amazing of a person he was. And he said, "I was just having a hard time inside the store and I came out for some fresh air and there you were." And he told me to make sure I pass on the good deed. And this story still gives me goosebumps because it's moments like this when people show compassion, when we become aligned with our potential. And moments like this are why we're here, to help each other while we progress on our own paths. And I want his good deed to go noticed so that those of you hearing this can use his actions as a reminder and as a model to pass on the good deed, because that is powerful. Oh, and the best part of the story is once I got back in the car and was able to take a breath, I look at the mileage number on my dashboard, and guess what it said? 42, the number of my spirit guides. So I think it's important to recognize that our guides are always with us, and they're always here to help and offer advice. And if they don't always come in to save the day, that doesn't mean they're not there. Remember, we are all here to learn different lessons and balance karma. And sometimes struggling is the medicine we need most at that time. Often we think of our challenges or problems as bad things that happen to us. But think of a child who fails through learning. Sometimes the only way to learn is to fail or to struggle. Think about a kid who is learning how to use scissors and they cut their finger. Yes, the cut will hurt, but once healed, the child cuts again and is now more aware of the process. So we learn. And at times, our lesson might just be to learn patience or hope or love. So sometimes we go through struggle. And it's the struggle that in return gives us a gift. Now, wouldn't it be nice to understand this concept in the moment of struggle? So maybe next time you find yourself feeling uneasy, think about this. And over time, you'll be more aware as it happens. So anyways, I do have one more piece of guidance that my guides have shared with me, and it's about unity and how we unfortunately and very often separate ourselves from each other in spirit. And this message sounds very much like my fire guide speaking, but as he says, and as I'm about to read, deciphering who is speaking doesn't really matter. So, with that, the message is, what keeps us separated is the perception of self. We each have different perceptions, different knowledge, different understandings. Only some are more open to learning. This invisible barrier between us is not really here. It is only here because we think it is. We are unaware. We put in place false barriers that block our true perceptions. But perception is only created by your thoughts. What you think, whatever that may be, is real, your truth. But don't forget, there are others whose truths may be different from you, and no less valuable. As energy flows from one state to the next, we are all created of the same. Yet we act as if we are all individual. Yes, we have individual gifts, but they are to be shared with all. We try so hard to confine ourselves in our own individual truths. We do not see past it. We all have individual truths because we are all learning different lessons. We are all on different roads, yet they all lead back to the same destination. So, as you live your truth, be mindful of others, because we come from spirit, and it's all the same. So, maybe that's a lot to take in, maybe not. But I think it's important for us to hear this, because especially in a world that has so many different opinions and passions, we often get confused and entangled in the net of our minds. We need to start listening to each other and showing respect for each other's viewpoints, because as you heard, we're all one and the same. So, one last message from my guides to you and me is, be one, be still with the earth, for we are right over your shoulder, protecting, teaching, and guiding the way. You may choose to listen or not. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Again, if you did, please use it to inspire those around you, and I will see you next time on In a Spiritual Sense. For those looking to connect further, please feel free to send emails to info@inaspiritualsense.com or hit me up on Instagram at spiagno, that is SPIAGNO, where you can find weekly inspiration and updates. I look forward to connecting with you.